And so when you have your story, you have to think about, I stand for these things. And the opposite of that is I stand against these things. Ideas, institutions, ways of thinking. You have to have a clear enemy, an arch nemesis, which is usually the mirror opposite of you. And just like you have your allies and sidekicks, your not your anti-hero, the antagonist in your story also has their allies. We refer to them as the rogues gallery of villains. And so you'll see that Batman has a rich gallery of villains, from the Joker to the Riddler to Bane, and the list goes on and on and on. Penguin, Man-Bat. And so those are the rogues gallery. So now we have 4 components to think about. When you're defining your personal brand, don't just think about your strengths. Find out what your weaknesses are.
When we did the pre-call about this, you said you actually wanted to reveal to the world that you're a bit of a comic book nerd, and that you want to sort of shine light on comic books in a really interesting way. And you were telling me a story about Marvel versus DC and how that can sort of influence the way people think about branding. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
And so I grew up loving Marvel comics. Now, I knew of the iconic characters in DC, but there was a grittiness and a realness to the Marvel comics that I could relate to. The characters in the Marvel universe were flawed. They struggled with things, whereas Superman was this alien from another planet that basically was invincible, had heat vision, could fly. His cold breath could knock over people. He had X-ray vision and super hearing. He had almost no weaknesses, just one: kryptonite. Whereas Peter Parker struggled to finish high school, to not let his identity be revealed, to try to have a date night with his girlfriend, to try to take some photographs. He struggled mightily. He was a person full of conflict. And that takes me to this place where I want to share something, in that in normal culture, we talk about myths, the Greek and Roman myths, and we think about those stories as having lasted the test of time. And we appear smarter if we talk about them and if we can relate it to the different gods and the demigods. But I think comics, especially now, are part of our current pop culture mythology, and it's time to give them some due. I was sketching out some ideas about personal branding, and I started to see some parallels between comic book characters and maybe you as a personal brand. Let me posit this question for your audience to listen to and think about, which is this: is that ask yourself this question: which heroes or villains have risen above the rest? In the comic book world, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of characters, but only a handful rise above. And my theory is they've done a better job of telling their story. We can identify with them. One of the reasons why I love the X-Men comic stories so much was because they're outcasts. They're homo superior, and they live in a homo sapien world. And they were the target of racism or genetic slander. And it really resonated with me, feeling the ever outsider. I could identify with these characters. So I want to draw some parallels here. Great characters have a strong story. You know their strengths and you know their weaknesses, and they're almost mirror opposites of each other. Complex, identifiable, relatable characters have just as many weaknesses as they have strengths. And you need to think about that, because when you're out there in the world and all you talk about is what you're good at, how you've won, what you've accomplished, you're making yourself harder to relate to. Comic book characters struggle with living 2 lives: their private life and their public life. In their public life, they're celebrated. They're the hero. Their private life is full of strife. They live in anonymity. And it's the conflict between these two, the public persona and the private persona, which is part of their struggle. Because with Clark Kent, Lois Lane would look at him and say, "Oh, Clark, you're such a wimp. Couldn't you be more like Superman?" And he has to bury that. So in comics, this is really interesting. In real life, This is a tragedy where we feel like our private self is not worthy of being seen. So we create an alter ego, a persona that is fake, one that we think the world wants to see, but isn't a true reflection of who we are. Because we think when the world sees our true self, the parts that are ugly about us, the parts we do not like, our shadow self, they will no longer love us.
Mm.
So we're chasing this thing, and it's amplified on social media with curated, photoshopped, highly stylized photography. We don't photograph when we're feeling weak. We don't photograph ourselves when we've had a failure, when we've been fired. We only photograph ourselves when we're eating that marvelous meal, or when we're on vacation, or when we're feeling and looking our best. So it creates this horrible cycle. So in the comic book world, this is necessary. That's fiction. In the real world, when you can be your true authentic self and your public self are the same, that's where you find your true power. We don't all have to be Superman. We all don't have to be Wonder Woman. We could
Mm.
just be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. We could be Daredevil, just trying to protect Hell's Kitchen,
Mm.
looking after our neighborhood. It doesn't have to be this global intergalactic space defense force. It could just be do the best that you can with what you have in the time that you have.
Yeah, I think it's such a rich idea, and I think it gives so many people the opportunity to be their own thing, their own space. They don't have to try and conform to being, I guess really, if I translate this to the business world, it's like everyone's talking about becoming the next unicorn. You have to become $1 billion company. That's the only goal that can really matter. Whereas it could just be that you want to build something that fulfills you or solves a problem or helps your community, or there's so many other kind of victory conditions that you could apply to your business or to your brand or to yourself or to your life. And I guess this framework allows a bit of leeway on that.
We start to wonder, the more perfect somebody appears to be, the less we believe them to be true.
Mm.
Perfect is boring. Perfect is inauthentic. Perfect is unrelatable. Our mission in life should not be to be perfect. It should be to be true to ourselves.
You also talked about Star Trek and why you should not occupy a certain color. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? It
Yes.
feels kind of like this similar in concept.
Yeah. I think when you look at stories, you can quickly identify who the heroes and the anti hero and who the villains are, who the sidekicks are. And then there's always a cast of characters that are just background material. In the movie world, they're called extras. They just appear on set so that the set doesn't look too empty. And it turns out those of the people who are Trekkies already know this, that in the original cast of Star Trek, the red shirt crew were 60% more likely to die. And that's a staggering amount. And it's because those characters were created to be generic, just to show that there's a consequence to action or inaction. And if you compare that to, say, if you wore a gold shirt in Star Trek, you're 16% likely to die, and then 12% if you're a blue shirt. Of course, Kirk, Captain Kirk, Uhura, Chekhov, and Spock, they don't die. We know that about them. So when you're looking at your personal brand, you should be doing everything you can not to be a background character.
Mm.
And background characters are two dimensional. We don't even learn their name. We don't know what it is that they do. There's no distinguishing characteristics about them. So, most definitely, don't be a red shirt character in a Star Trek
I
world.
think that's definitely a way to stand out, is to share those things, because everybody's going to be running around talking about their strengths, and but very few people are going to be honest about what they're actually not good at, or where they need help, or where somebody could support them because it's not their strength necessarily.
I will share one other idea from this personal branding framework around pop culture mythology.
I'd love
We've been
that.
talking a little bit about you as the character in the story, but you need a world to live in. So the world that you live in is a character in the story. And the way that I describe that is, what city do you live in today? And if you had a choice and you moved to that city, you did it for a specific reason and to understand that the city is not just a backdrop, it's a part of your character. And people have strong associations with people with where they live. If I say to you Los Angeles, certain ideas come to your mind. And if I say I live in LA, some people, their eyes might roll. Oh, that's where people are really flashy. That's where all the movie stars are. That's where you have all these crazy diets and yoga pants and everything else that you can think of. That's where all the plastic surgery is done and the paparazzi are hounding people. That's where there's traffic on the 405 and the 10 freeway. The glitz and glam. This is the entertainment capital of the world. And it's true. Much of that is true. There's other things to it, but the city in which you live in becomes a character in your narrative, part of the world. Now, all heroes have allies and sidekicks. These are the people who support the hero in their journey. So think about who your allies and sidekicks are. And then, I think this is necessary in all fictional work, but I also think it's relevant in the personal branding world, which is defining and having a strong arch nemesis, your rival, which is the mirror opposite of usually the hero. So Superman is all powerful. And because he's all powerful, he hasn't had to work on his intellect very much. We don't see Superman reading things, even though he could read probably hundreds of pages in a minute. So, of course, his arch nemesis is none other than Lex Luthor, a physically weak person, but intellectually superior to Superman. Superman thinks about helping people. Lex Luthor thinks about controlling the world. Heroes have also nicknames, and the nicknames allow people to quickly identify who they are. So Clark Kent is Superman. He's a man that is super above all else. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So in your world, you need to come up with your own nickname. I like to refer to this as your two-word brand. I'm a loud introvert. So I'm not calling myself Superman, but those two words that are kind of juxtaposed against each other give people a shorthand as to who I am.
Mm.
Boxers have this, wrestlers have this, and this for a good reason. It allows someone to take a very complex story, to distill it down to something bite-sized and memorable, and then we remember them. Dwayne Johnson is The Rock. Rowdy Piper. Jake the Snake Roberts. It tells you a lot about who they are. You don't even need to know the rest of the story. And so when you have your story, you have to think about, I stand for these things. And the opposite of that is I stand against these things. Ideas, institutions, ways of thinking. You have to have a clear enemy, an arch nemesis, which is usually the mirror opposite of you. And just like you have your allies and sidekicks, your not your anti-hero, the antagonist in your story also has their allies. And we refer to them as the rogues gallery of villains. And so you'll see like Batman has a rich gallery of villains, from the Joker to the Riddler to Bane, and the list goes on and on and on. Penguin, Man-Bat. And so those are the rogues gallery. So now we have 4 components to think about. When you're defining your personal brand, don't just think about your strengths. Find out what your weaknesses are. Understand that you also have an alter ego, the public self, and your private self.
We are always telling the people we work with to draw a line in the sand. Because I think for me in this day and age, it's more so than ever is to stand out. You need to stand against something or to stand for something. It's impossible for people to find you if you don't have some kind of an opinion. And I love this idea of who is your ally and how do you kind of partner with people to fulfill that, to ultimately stand against that thing. Hello YouTube, I'm Ross Drakes. I'm the founder of Nice Work, and thank you so much for your time at watching this video. If you're seeing me, it means you made it all the way to the end, so we've at least done something right. If you enjoyed this, we'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and that thumbs up. It really helps the channel. And I think more important than that is if you know someone who might need to hear this, if you think someone out there who needs this message in their life, please spread the link, because it makes a huge difference to the world and it allows us to fulfill our message of making sure that there are no more bad brands in the world. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you in the next video.